Okay, so we're going to try this again. I already recorded this once, and my voice came back as blah, 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 blah. So here we go. All right, this is the beginning of Standard 6, and we are picking up in the post-World War I period, so you need to try to bring everything with you from Standard 5. Standard 5 is very key to Standard 6. Standard 6 is very key to Standard 7. So a lot of these things are going to start tying together more so than they have in the previous units. So you really need to make sure that if you need a refresher on World War I, that you go back and take a look at that. Most importantly, the very end of Standard 5, we talked about Warren G. Harding and his Return to Normalcy campaign and kind of bringing the United States back to where it was before the war. Very important to keep that with you. In addition to the fact that Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and this whole idealistic view of what the world should look like. Because for the most part, things were looking really good in the United States during the 1920s. This period proved to be very transformative in the United States. You had a lot of new machinery, a lot of innovative technology, and new approaches to that technology that's going to fuel the growth throughout the United States. Now, there's one focal point here. This is Will Rogers. He was a comedian. He was from Oklahoma. Pretty well known in the 1920s. Dies in a plane crash with another Okie named Wiley Post. But what I really want to focus on is the quote. So, no nation in the history of the world was ever sitting as pretty. If we want anything, all we have to do is go and buy it on credit. So that leaves us without any economic problems whatsoever, except perhaps someday having to pay for them. But we're certainly not thinking of that this early. Go back to the end of Standard 4 when we talked about the Gilded Age. We mentioned some terms about conspicuous consumerism and mass culture and this idea that most people in the United States were buying things that they couldn't afford. They were buying things to impress people. There was this newfound purchasing power for consumers. Well, that's no different in the 1920s. That's continuing, and it's continuing on a whole new extreme because our economy is doing so well at the end of World War I. So kind of keep that in the back of your brain here as we kind of go through this section. But first we pick up with communism. Now hopefully you remember from Standard 5 that communism starts with the Bolshevik Revolution. Vladimir Lenin is released from exile in Switzerland by the Germans. He goes back to Russia, meets up with Joseph Stalin, starts the Bolshevik Revolution, and communism is instituted to create the Soviet Union. If any of that sounds new to you, you need to go back and check your Standard 5 notes. So, at the end of World War I, we're very fearful of communism because it's pretty much everything anti-capitalist, which is what we are. And we were afraid that there were groups of people in the United States that wanted to overthrow democracy and institute communism. Were there communists in the United States? Absolutely. But was there this mass turnaround in the United States where everybody wanted to overthrow democracy and institute this communist revolution? No. But fear is a powerful tool. So one such case is called Sacco and Vanzetti. S-A-C-C-O. Sacco. Vanzetti. V-N-Z-E-T-T-I. So Sacco and Vanzetti. They were Italians, and they lived outside of Boston, called Braintree, Massachusetts. And they were associated with one of the local anarchy groups, and anarchy being, anti-government. They were accused of committing a murder. And the gentleman who witnessed the crime said that the people who committed the crime looked Italian. Well, Sacco and Vanzetti didn't commit the crime. There's no evidence to support the fact that they committed the crime. But the gentleman's saying that the people looked Italian, local authorities research Italians in the area. They learned that Sacco and Vanzetti are associated with an or a communist group within the city of Boston. Boom. They're the criminals. They're convicted and executed. Is that fair? Definitely not, because they didn't commit the crime. But that just shows that the Red Scare, as it's called, the first Red Scare, it was really a fear of everything that wasn't American. We kind of get back to this principle of isolation in the United States at the end of World War I. So that's the first Red Scare. We're going to come back to the second Red Scare at the end of World War II, and it's still a fear of communism, but it's a different sort of communism by the time we get to that period in our history. So Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, during the Red Scare, is leading what he called Palmer raids. And the Palmer raids were going throughout society, whether you're attacking movie stars or you're attacking radio personalities or newspaper journalists or government officials, you name it. And it was like a witch hunt, similar to like the Salem witch trials back in the 1600s in Salem, Massachusetts, where I accuse you of a witch, you must be a witch. So in this case, if I accuse you of being a communist, well, you must be a communist. And there will be people whose lives are completely ruined from the Palmer raids and the accusations of them being communist. Businesses, politicians, whole nine yards, they lose everything. So I would circle or highlight both the Red Scare and the Palmer raids, and really make sure that you write down Sacco and Vanzetti as well, the Italians who are accused of committing a crime outside of Boston, Massachusetts. But let's talk about something a little bit happier here. So the 1920s, rapid economic growth in the United States. And much of that boom is due to the gentleman on the screen, Henry Ford. Prior to the 1920s, really only wealthy people could afford a car. It was seen as like a class divider. It was the haves and the have-nots, primarily because the automobile was about $850 in 1908. However, Henry Ford was a businessman, and all businesses want to increase profits, right? We talked about that multiple times. So he wanted to get closer to the resources he was using to build his automobile. That was outside of Detroit. So what does he do? He moves his plant that is making the Model T to Detroit. Nowadays, not only is Ford automobile built in Detroit, but you got Chevy and Chrysler and all those other major brands that are primarily built in the Detroit area as well. So now that he has better access to resources, that means the resources become cheaper, right? Supply and demand, access to resources, all those things. If the resources are cheaper, that means the price of the car can be made cheaper. Henry Ford was a genius at business. So what he does, when he moves to the plant and gets the resources for cheaper and decreases the price, he'll drop the cost of the car to $350 by 1916. That's within 8 years that he more than halves the price of the automobile. And by 1927, shortly before the whole bottom falls out of the economy with the Great Depression, his automobile gets down to $290. That is a decrease of close to $600. Now, if the cost of the car goes down $600, who can afford the car? Pretty much anybody. So he looks at the people who are working on his cars as consumers. And by looking at them as consumers, he believes that he can actually become even more profitable. So he does a few things that are kind of revolutionary. He's going to pay his workers $5 a day. That is far and above any other factory within the United States. and he gives them Saturdays and Sundays off. He creates what we would call the weekend. You get that time off to spend time with your family, to do leisure activities, whatever. So he believed that workers who were happy would be more productive. And if they were happy and more productive, not only is he going to produce more cars at a faster rate, they're going to turn around and do what? Buy his car. So yeah, he paid them more, but not only did they feel happy about that payment, they turned around and gave the money back to him by purchasing his automobile. Genius marketing. And they were happy to do it because they had time off. They weren't working the 6 to 7 days a week that we talked about with some of these other factories early on in the Industrial Revolution. So Ford makes the Model T affordable by applying mass production techniques to making cars. Now, mass production is important. Circle it, highlight it, do whatever you need to do. But he didn't create mass production. He is just the first guy, he referring to Ford, that is going to apply mass production to something so intricate. So when we were talking about the Industrial Revolution in Standard 3 and Standard 4, talking about, I think in class I used the example of the desk. Something breaks on the desk, there's a part somewhere in a factory, you know, the exact replica, and it's just easy to stick right on and call it good. But the mass production of the automobile used on the assembly line is going to make the car more affordable, and they're able to produce a car every 15 minutes in the early 1900s. They produced the Model T in 15 minutes. That's unreal. And he did this by going to the wonderful meatpacking industries in Chicago we talked about. You guys should remember it. Upton Sinclair, the jungle, the beautiful industry of meatpacking. He goes and studies that industry and how they're able to put a carcass on a hook, and that hook just goes around essentially in a circle, and each person has an individual job with that carcass. So they put the car on the assembly line. So let's say that my job is to stand in the same position all day and put the front left tire on. I'm going to get really good at putting that front left tire on so I can do it like that. I'm producing that front left tire every couple of seconds or every minute. And so they have people who become specialized in one specific part of that automobile, and that is why they're able to produce so many cars so quickly, which allowed him to decrease the cost all the way down to $290. No, I'm sorry, it's 15 minutes now. He dropped it from 12 hours to 90 minutes, which is still impressive. But nowadays we can produce simplistic cars in about 15 minutes. I got a little excited there, jumped ahead. So the things that you really need to keep in mind is the fact that he studies the meatpacking industry and the fact that he reviews every step of that process to become more efficient. The more efficient you become, the greater the cost can come down. And just on a side note, some of the other modes of transportation that are being created at this time, you've got Orville and Wilbur Wright, who in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, 1903, invent the airplane. And the airplane is obviously going to play not really a significant role in World War I, but it's going to play a really significant role in World War II. By the time we get to this period in history, the 1920s, we are starting to see commercial airlines. That's going to be the airlines that are going to be flying people like you and I from one location to another, as opposed to just your small personal airplanes. Ford also, as we said, raised his workers' pay, and he shortened their hours, making them more satisfied. And this, you can see here, is an image from Henry Ford's factory. And we're going to stop here. Good place to stop, and I'll get this one up and then produce the next video here in just a few minutes.